well, hopefully third time's the charm. But here I'm going again. I am just going to reply to a comment from here on the video because it'll be easier for me. Someone was just talking about the video that I had made earlier, and I realized, I needed to just kind of go back a little bit and explain something about Mary and the way, part of some of the, why we're where we're at. If, this is, I'm going to tell you about the last few days of my mother's life here on this earth, and how Mary had, when I went down there when my mother broke her hip, after about a week or two, the doctor had called me out in the hall, and he talked to me, and he told me that, my mother was in her last days, and it took me a while to kind of get a grip of that, but, I didn't really, but anyhow. So, but I spent every second there with my mother, and I knew that my mom was afraid. She didn't want to go to, she was kind of nervous about going to sleep, and she didn't want to die. I can't imagine anybody just wants to. So anyhow, I had talked to him after, I'm kind of condensing it, but I had talked to him, and I begged him and asked him to please don't tell her. I know y'all don't have to bring it up unless she asks you. I'm not going to ask him to lie, but you don't have to bring it up. After a long discussion, he did do that. He honored my wishes, and no one talked about end of life and all that in front of her. And he told me, I should make sure that whoever wanted to see her came to see her. And so I had called my husband, because he was up here in Georgia, and I was there with her for a while. And I had told him to get everybody and let them know that if they wanted to see her, or say something, they needed to come now, and he did. And when they got there, I was really strict, and I was like, don't nobody go in there crying and carrying on. You will go in there, and you will make her smile, and you will let her know you love her, and she don't need to know nothing else. And they honored that. There was only one that didn't, and y'all can guess who. I told my family, but I told my mom that if she had wanted to go home, and so I was trying to talk to him about it, and the doctor that is, so he agreed to, he was going to let her go home on Monday morning. This was on Saturday, and he was going to call hospice, and what we were going to do is, she was under the impression that nurses were going to come in to help out, and make sure she's doing okay and check her blood pressure and stuff, which is the way, I felt it would be better for her. So when Mary found out that she was going to be coming home on Monday, which she also knew that meant that I wouldn't be leaving, because that was made very clear to her by my mother, that I had said I would stay, and I would stay. And Mary pitched, oh Lord, she just waited till I went to talk to my husband, and she went up to the hospital. She just had herself a royal fit. I mean, she was in there yelling at my mom, telling her she just cannot come home. She just can't do it. And she couldn't live with me, and she was just going to have to leave if I was staying. It was just awful. They ended up asking her to leave because she was upsetting her so terribly. And anyway, I get up there, and she's walking out the door, and she's fuming. And she went back to the condo. She just was carrying on and cussing, and just, and I'm going to tell you something. My youngest daughter is not one to do that to. Not one to do it. I wouldn't do it. And she was on the verge of, she was about to put some lights out. That I'm not gonna lie. And my husband called me, and he said, this is gonna get bad. And I said, I know. And I said, I know what'll happen. She'll pitch one of her fits, and we'll be getting Sarah out of jail. And I don't want to do that. I'd rather y'all just go on back home. Y'all go home, and I'll call you, when I need you. And, they'd only been there one day, and it's an 8-hour drive, and we're in the afternoon of Saturday already. But that was the best decision, because, I didn't want none of my children to get in trouble because of her, and I know how she is. And I also know how my kids are. And, you know, all I can say is, you know, it would have been a 1, 2, 3 out. And I know Mary. So they left. They drove all the way back home that night. And they had been home probably, I don't know, a couple of hours when I called to tell them that my mother was gone. And it was really a terrible night. I mean, I was trying to, you know, it was just terrible because I had so many things going on. And I was sitting in there with my mom, and my mom asked me, she said, "You're going to leave, aren't you?" And I said, "No, I'm not leaving." And I said, "Why do you think I would leave you? I would not leave you." And she said, I just know Mary, and I know and I know with her behavior and with you missing your children and your grandchildren and your family and your life, she goes, I know it would be easy to go home. And it was, you know, I promised her that I would not leave, and I meant it from the bottom of my heart. I meant it. But that night, I think it was a part of her just gave up, you know. I think she just, the light went out in her, and she just, you know, and that next morning, that Sunday morning, around 6 o'clock, the nurses were in there, and they were doing their checks. You know, she was in ICU, but they were doing their vitals and stuff to do the change of shift. And my mom didn't see me in there. Because you know the nurses was around her, and she's calling my name, and I sat up, and I was like, you know, I told her, I said, "Mom, I'm right here. I'm right here. I didn't go nowhere." And she just looked at me and she smiled and she said, "I love you." And I said, "I love you too." And she said, "Will you open them blinds?" And I did, because she loved to see the morning. She didn't want to get up and get out in it, but she wanted to see it come up. She loved the sunrise. And I'm going to tell y'all something. When the sun started peeking through the window, and it was like a ray of light, at 6:21, you know, I'm standing there. The nurse said to me, she's in defib, you know, kind of telling me, you need to. So I went up beside her, you know, and this look of softness came across her face. It was as if she was 14 years old again. There was a peace on her face and just a beauty like I've never seen before in my life. And as the sun was coming in, her heart stopped, and the room became ultra silent. And it just seemed like no one could move, the nurses, and we were just frozen in time there. And then after, I don't know, a minute or so, you know, the nurse came up. She still said nothing. She gave me a hug, and she went out in the hallway. And I stayed there about another 2 hours. And then I went back to the condo, and, you know, I told my other sister and Mary, I had to tell Mary came out of the bedroom, and I told him that Mom was gone. And I didn't say what she said. I said Mom was gone. And I sat there for a few minutes, and I was like, you know, if you want to go, we got to go to the funeral home. We got to go make all that, make sure everything's arranged so they can pick her up. And they didn't want to go, and that was fine. So my older sister, my other sister that lives in Florida, and I went and took care of that. But no one, and it wasn't, you know, let me just go ahead and put this one in here. When Mary came out of the room, and as soon as she heard that Mom was gone, she looked at me and Catherine and said, "Where are the Jeep keys?" Now, I had already been told to take the keys from my mother because the tag expired on November 3rd, and we're on November 15th, and my mother didn't want me to renew it because she didn't want her driving it, because you know, that's another story. But, and I did as I'm told. I did that. I didn't get the tag renewed. No one drove it. And I just looked at her, and I was like, We can't just give you a Jeep with no insurance, no tag, and say, here you go do what you're going to do. It's just not legal. It's not legal. She started right then about money on the day of. She thought she knew more than anyone, and she thought it should just be handed over to her. Well, it doesn't work that way, and most grown people know that. And I'm going to tell you, we were surprised at the end of this. We were surprised. We were totally surprised, because I know what we all expected. Probably the same thing Mary did, but it did not come to be that way. My mother had a different plan, which confirmed everything to me, because my mom knew. She knew who Mary was at the end. She knew, and she didn't want to cause any more fear, because if Mary had thought for 1 second that she was only going to get minimal, in fact, she got more than she was supposed to get, to be honest with you. We were more than fair with her, and there's no regret there. So it was that, and then it became a financial battle with Mary. And I'm going to tell you, she carries on like this was still going on, and all this stuff is still out there, when reality is this. I mean, I could get the date for you, because I did keep the information. In January, 2015, November 2015, and in January, around the 5th of January, we had the bulk of the finances it was wired to an account, and we got her a cashier's check for $10,000. We drove out there together, my oldest sister and I had to talk, and I handed her the cashier's check, and I said, this is it. Okay, this is all you're getting. The land, you can take the land out there where you grew up with Mom and Larry, and I said, the taxes are not paid. I didn't pay them this year. They were actually due at that point. I should have, I could have wrote the check, but I didn't. So I said, the taxes are due now, so you need to take care of that. And she looked at us and said, where is the deed? And my sister looked at me like, okay. And I said, Mary, we don't know. Figure it out. And she's like, well, what am I supposed to do? I said, figure it out. Just figure it out. This is what you got. This is what we're telling you. And don't ever call us or bother us again. And we left. And then she stayed there until she was kicked out, and everything my mother had was put out on the side of the road, which she could have took it. We took what we wanted, what we was sentimental about. The pictures came with me, and my other sister she wanted a couple of dolls, because she's a collector as well as my mom. And my oldest sister, really, the only thing she wanted was one picture that hung on the wall in the living room, and I made sure she had it. And when we left there, we never went back. And we heard from the bank, and we were sued for the balance of the condo. The property was paid off out at, in Jacksonville, but not out at the condo. It wasn't paid off, so we couldn't do it. I mean, the loan was upside down, and it just wasn't. It just couldn't be. It wasn't it would not have been a smart decision. Let me just put it that way. But you can't explain none of this to Mary. And even though I've showed the papers where we were sued, and I've showed other documentations of letters that came with the heirs of my mom on it, Mary was always listed as the one who was most of them don't have her name on it. It was just the one who was in the condo that they had to get out. I can't remember she was called an unknown that was in possession of the condo and not getting out. And I've showed these things before. Now she chooses not to see them, and that's just too sad. But I wanted you to understand, she is not a decent person. She's not a good person. She cared nothing about her mother. She cared nothing about her brother. She cares nothing about her sisters, never has. It's always been about Mary. She's a selfish, spoiled person who just she's very good at conniving and tricking people into thinking she's some victim. And I'm gonna tell you something. Nobody would have ever heard from me if Mary would have just kept my family out of her mouth. Just not mention them. Don't talk about my daughter. Don't talk about my mother in a negative way. You can talk positive, but the negative garbage, don't lie. That was the whole point. Don't lie. Don't trash what took so long to build, and that's a whole different story as well. But I'm at 15 minutes, and I'll stop it here, and I hope I got it across somewhat. And I thank y'all for listening.